What happens when you put 707 horsepower under the hood of a Jeep Grand Cherokee is a question that not too many of us had been asking, but obviously it was something that was definitely on the top of Jeep engineers' minds. So what the engineers did was they took a Grand Cherokee and then they took a Hellcat, tossed them in a blender, and poured out an all-wheel drive 707 horsepower SUV. In case you're wondering, that means that this is significantly more powerful than any SUV that Mercedes-Benz makes, BMW makes, Audi makes, or even Porsche. In fact, even if you pay Porsche over $160,000, you still won't go from 0 to 60 faster in a Cayenne than a Grand Cherokee. And oddly enough, because this is a Jeep, they decided to keep ground clearance at 8.1 inches. We were able to get our hands on the Trackhawk out here in Oregon thanks to the Automotive Video Association. Alex and Autos is one of the founding members of the AVA, along with To the Red Line, TFL Car, and a few other outlets. Be sure to check out some of the other reviews that we've shot out here today, and also check out some of the other AVA members' reviews on the same cars to see how we have different opinions. Up front, the Trackhawk is instantly recognizable as a Grand Cherokee. We have the very traditional 7-slot grille right up here, some light pipes inside the headlamp modules, and of course they're still labeled since 1941. Because this engine requires much more cooling than any of the other Grand Cherokee models, we have some additional cooling vents and ducts right over here on the front of the vehicle, in addition to some functional hood scoops right back here. The way Jeep designed the hood scoops, they're pretty demure actually, because you can't really see them from this angle. But from this angle or inside the Grand Cherokee, you can definitely see these grille openings. At 189.8 inches long, the Trackhawk is not exactly a compact crossover. This is notably longer than something like a Mercedes-Benz GLC 63 AMG. But this is about 3 inches shorter than a BMW X5. And that's because the Grand Cherokee overall is more of a mid-size crossover or mid-size SUV, whatever you really want to call the Grand Cherokee. Some Jeep fans object to calling the Grand Cherokee a crossover, but the Grand Cherokee really is the truest crossover that's on the market in the United States, because this is definitely, without a doubt, an off-road capable vehicle. It has a very healthy V8 engine under the hood, a rear-wheel drive biased 4-wheel drive system with a 2-speed transfer case, but it's also a unibody vehicle. In theory, the crossover description is a blending of car-like features and truck-like features, and that's definitely what we see in the Grand Cherokee. This is definitely more of a true crossover than your average crossover in America, which is really just sort of an overinflated hatchback. Out back, you could almost be forgiven for thinking that the Trackhawk is just another Grand Cherokee, until you start it, of course, and hear the exhaust note. We have very similar tail lamp modules. They're slightly smoked. We have a Trackhawk badge right down here and quad exhaust tips lower on the bumper. This looks very similar to the regular SRT version of the Grand Cherokee, if of course you could call the nearly 500 horsepower Grand Cherokee a regular model. Like many of FCA's other performance vehicles, the Grand Cherokee can have a wide variety of engines under the hood, ranging from a 3.6-liter V6 to a 5.7-liter V8 or even a 6.4-liter V8, but under this hood we find the same 6.2-liter supercharged engine that we find under the hood of the Dodge Hellcat series. Even though this isn't a Grand Cherokee, it produces the same 707 horsepower and 645 pound-feet of torque as those Dodge performance cars. It is mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission, but unlike the Dodges, this is also mated to an all-wheel drive system. The all-wheel drive system is very similar to the one that we find in the less powerful Grand Cherokee SRT, and it can either balance power 50-50 front-rear, or it can send 70% of the power to the rear. That's dictated by the terrain management system that we find in most Grand Cherokee models. I'm not sure how many people would want to tow with their Trackhawk, but because the Jeep engineers have a sense of humor, they have given this a 7,200 pound tow rating, which is definitely healthy. Front seat comfort is essentially the same as the rest of the Grand Cherokee lineup because these seats are basically the same as what we find in the Grand Cherokee Summit. We have a multi-way power adjustable driver's seat with a 4-way adjustable lumbar support and a memory-linked electric tilt telescopic steering column. Overall ratings really depend on what you want to compare the Grand Cherokee's seats to. You will find more comfortable and more adjustable seats in your average luxury performance SUV, with things like inflatable side bolsters, extending thigh cushions, etc. But these seats are definitely more comfortable than your average American crossover or SUV. Thanks to the Grand Cherokee's overall size, we find more rear legroom and more rear headroom than in your average compact luxury crossover. So if you're comparing this to something like an Audi SQ5 or a Mercedes-Benz GLC 63 AMG, then you're going to find a little bit more room back here. Of course, this doesn't normally compete with either the Audi or the Mercedes, but we will see a 500 horsepower GLC coming very soon. And of course, that Mercedes is going to be priced about the same as this Grand Cherokee. Because this is a mid-size SUV, we definitely find more room than those compact options if we scoot on over to the middle seat position. As we see in the rest of the Grand Cherokee lineup, the rear seats recline and they have a decent range of motion. We have rear seat air vents, and we actually also have a rear seat entertainment system for the kiddies. Thanks to the mid-size dimensions of the Grand Cherokee, we still have the same very accommodating cargo area in the back. Under the cargo area load floor, we find some additional storage space and unusually an honest-to-goodness spare tire. This tire has about the same kind of sectional width that we find on the average family sedan's main tires, but compared to the 295s on this vehicle, it kind of looks like a donut. As we look around the interior, let's start out with the rear door panels. One of the big changes for the Trackhawk version is that to help justify its high starting price, they covered the rear doors in leather as well as the front doors. Many luxury vehicles have stitched leather upper panels on their rear doors or even front doors, but this goes all the way down here to the bottle holder. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that the model we're driving has a number of options, raising the MSRP on this model to over $100,000. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable seatbelts and four-way adjustable headrests. We have Trackhawk embossed on the front seat backs, and then some very distinctive stitching going on right here for the center perforated section. These seats are both ventilated as well as heated. As with the rear doors, the front doors are entirely covered in stitched leather. That includes the area right down here around the bottle holder, but not the actual inside of the bottle holder. The trim on the interior is carbon fiber, and you can see the contrasting stitching right there and the perforated leather center section of the door panel that matches the seat fabric. The love for stitched leather continues on the dashboard, where we again find more of those contrasting seams and that carbon fiber trim. Unlike lesser models of the Grand Cherokee that also have an optional stitched leather dashboard, this leather dash continues all the way down until it meets the carpet, so the lower panels are also stitched leather. That has a big impact on the luxury feel right up here by the driver's legs and the passenger's legs, where in other models of Grand Cherokee with a leather dash, these sections become hard plastics. In the center of the dashboard, we have essentially the same LCD infotainment system that we find in the rest of the Grand Cherokee lineup, but we have some additional performance pages with things like lap timers, some additional gauges. There's also a G-force meter and an engine readout. It's worth noting that changing the screens on these performance apps is a little bit sluggish compared to some of the other interactions in this system. This is also where we can adjust the auto mode setup or choose the race option. You can turn the paddle shifters on and off, change the stability control, change the way the all-wheel drive and the suspension and steering behave. Below the infotainment system, we find some controls for the dual-zone climate control system, as well as some of the vehicle's other functions, like the autonomous parking system, parking sensors, lane sense system. There's an eco button, which I think is hilarious in a vehicle like this, and of course a traction control disable button. Working our way down from there, there's a small storage cubby where we find two USB inputs, an auxiliary input, and a 12-volt power port, although there's not quite enough room in there for a large smartphone. There are two large fixed cup holders on the right side there. We have a very traditional console shifter, drive us all the way to the back. Sport mode over to the left. We push away from the driver for gear down, pull towards the driver for gear up. And then behind that we have the drive mode selector knob. This replaces the sort of terrain management knob that we find in the other Jeep models. To the left, there's a button to engage launch control. We have auto, sport, track, snow, and of course a tow mode, because we can still tow those 7,200 pounds. There's a drive modes button that's a shortcut inside the infotainment system, and of course we can engage a custom mode as well. Between the front seats, we have a padded leather armrest that opens to reveal a small storage cubby where I could barely put my iPhone 7 Plus right in there. There's also a 12-volt power port, and the reason this is so small is because this has the optional optical disc player. On the driver's side, we find the same partial LCD instrument cluster as the rest of the Grand Cherokee lineup, with a physical speedometer over here on the left and some auxiliary gauges over here on the right. Everything else is being given to you inside the 8-inch LCD. This LCD is where you'll find a tachometer and a digital speedometer as well. There are also a number of different gauges like intercooler temperature, boost pressure, air-fuel ratio, engine power. We also have engine torque, intake air temperature, battery voltage. Pretty much anything you could imagine measuring under the hood is read out right there. There's also a Trackhawk option where we can see the 0 to 60 timers, 0 to 100 timers, etc. The terrain option shows what mode the vehicle is in, whether it's track, sport, auto, etc. There's a display to show you the status of the vehicle's safety systems, and of course we get our typical trip computer information like fuel economy. The steering wheel is very similar to what we see in Hellcat models. We have shift paddles on the back of the steering wheel, down on the left, up on the right, sport grips up top and below, and a flat bottom. The airbag cover is leather wrapped. The button arrangement over here on the left side of the wheel controls that multifunction instrument cluster. We have some dedicated phone buttons over here below that. And then on this side of the steering wheel, we have the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system. Obviously, acceleration is what the Trackhawk is all about, and it really doesn't disappoint. We ran from 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds to 3.6 seconds, no matter what we were doing with the car. Launch control on, launch control off, people in the car, me in the car just by myself. There is so much power coming out of this engine, and the shifts of the automatic transmission happen so savagely that it seems like you could connect anything to this car and still get from 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds. I mean, you might lose the boat off of your boat trailer in the process, but you could probably still get 0 to 60 in 4 seconds with one attached. The 0 to 30 time is perhaps what is most impressive. This ran from 0 to 30 in 1.1 seconds. That is incredibly fast, and all thanks to the all-wheel drive system. Because this is much faster 0 to 30 than the Dodge Challenger Hellcat. The Challenger Hellcat, in fact, actually runs from 0 to 60 just about the same time as this Grand Cherokee. In the quarter mile, it is going to be just a little bit faster because it's lighter, but if you're just doing stoplight races, this is going to be just as fast or faster because of the added traction, and it's all down there in the 0 to 30 time. Acceleration time in this vehicle is so good and so savage that even something like a GT-R Nismo is only going to be a half second faster 0 to 60 than this. And keep in mind, of course, we are talking about a nearly 5,500 pound SUV. The Grand Cherokee obviously starts to show its weight when it comes time to either stop the vehicle or start turning this vehicle in the corners. We do have an awful lot of body roll. That has to do not only with the weight of the vehicle, but also the ground clearance of the Grand Cherokee and the fact that Jeep, for some reason, wanted to allow this model some level of off-road ability. With 8.1 inches of ground clearance and a transfer case that is substantially similar to what we see in the Grand Cherokee SRT or the Grand Cherokee Summit, this is still a very, very capable off-road vehicle, aside from the fact that the suspension is very, very firm. With 295 with tires on the Grand Cherokee and a well-designed suspension, actual handling ability is quite good, but the feel is just a little bit peculiar compared to your average luxury performance crossover. There's an awful lot more body roll in the corners. It's more difficult to tell exactly what the front suspension is up to. The steering is also not quite as quick as other performance SUVs, definitely not as quick as something like a Porsche Cayenne. Of course, because we have a supercharger under the hood, not turbochargers, the sound coming out of the back is unadulterated, and it really is an extraordinary noise. The turbocharged engines that we find in a lot of the European performance luxury vehicles interrupt the exhaust flow from the engine because that's how a turbocharger works. And the result is that the exhaust noise is just not as exciting as the supercharged engines we find under the hood of this, or actually something like a Land Rover Range Rover. The Grand Cherokee Trackhawk actually reminds me a great deal of the supercharged Range Rovers. The Range Rovers also have a solid off-road mission in mind, and as a result, they don't handle quite as well as something like a BMW X5M or a Mercedes AMG crossover. When you start taking a look at the numbers, there's just no two ways about it. There are other crossovers or SUVs out there that will handle better than the Grand Cherokee, without question. There are other crossovers out there that can go places this Grand Cherokee could not go. That's pretty obvious, including the other versions of the Grand Cherokee itself. But there really are no other crossovers out there that can get 0 to 60 as fast as this Grand Cherokee. And that's exactly what this is about. There are also very few crossovers out there that can sound as good as the Grand Cherokee while they're doing it. Now, the Porsche Cayenne does sound nice when it's driving out on the road. The E63 has a very nice exhaust note as well, but none is quite what we're hearing in the Trackhawk. I've said before that nobody does batshit crazy quite like FCA, and this is sort of the embodiment, the distillation of that craziness. Putting 707 horsepower in a Jeep is probably one of the craziest things that I've ever seen anybody do. And this isn't some one-off SEMA car. This is a car you can actually go down to the dealer and buy right now. I think the only thing crazier than this would, of course, be a 707 horsepower pickup truck. But stay tuned, because FCA is probably working on one of those too. So to recap, we have a 5,400 pound SUV that can go from 0 to 60 in 3.4 to 3.5 seconds with very little effort. You just take your foot off the brake, mash the gas, bang, you're at 0 to 60 before you realize it. Again, this is only 1/2 of a second slower than the fastest Nissan GT-R at the moment. So how much will one of these set you back? Well, it starts at $85,900, assuming you could find a Jeep dealer that would sell it to you for MSRP. The model we're looking at right here rang in at just over $100,000 because this has all of the options on it, including the rear seat entertainment system, so that way you can watch SpongeBob SquarePants while you're doing incredibly fast quarter miles. $100,000 sounds like an awful lot, but compared to, I suppose, the competition, It's not that expensive because a GLE 63 starts at $102,550 and it is nearly a full second slower 0 to 60. Of course, the GLE is going to handle an awful lot better, and as a performance SUV, this is fundamentally flawed in a way because it doesn't have the handling ability that we find in the GLE. But in another way, considering handling in the Jeep Grand Cherokee may actually be sort of a misplaced priority, because that's not necessarily the mission of the Jeep lineup. Even a Trackhawk like this, you could take this out on a track and you could pull 0.89, perhaps maybe 0.9 Gs if you really pushed it, but you're definitely going to find better handling SUVs out there. But those better handling SUVs would not be able to go off-road like this Grand Cherokee with 8.1 inches of ground clearance. If you want a Porsche Cayenne that gets close to the 0 to 60 acceleration we found in this Jeep, you could spend $161,600 starting. That's $61,000 more than the top end price here for a base Porsche Cayenne Turbo S, and it would get you 0 to 60 about 0.4 of a second slower than this. I think in reality, the only real competition for the Trackhawk is actually the 707 horsepower Hellcat, either the sedan or the coupe. And when you compare this against those, I would take the Jeep any day. This is a more practical vehicle overall. We have more cargo room in the back. It has all-wheel drive, so the performance 0 to 60 is better. This does drop down a little bit in terms of handling, especially over the new wide-body Hellcat, but I'd probably take the Grand Cherokee over them. Be sure and let me know what you think about this down there in the comment section down below, and let me know whether you would rationally compare this to a GLE 63 or a Cayenne or any of the other performance luxury crossovers out there. I think this is just a little bit too different in its mission. Again, I'm Alex Dykes. This has been the 2018 Trackhawk. Be sure and check out our Facebook page over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, and I'll see you next week.